And welcome to SLT Tea Time. We are a group of speech and language therapists and students from Black and diverse ethnic backgrounds. The aim of this podcast is to create a space and discussion around race, ethnicity, and lived experiences of SLTs in the workplace and university.
I'm Ilya, and Suleika and Anne and Ange, and we're here from the SLT Time, and we're joined today by Angela and Heeral, who set up the SLTs of Colour Instagram page.
Hi, I'm Angela. I am a speech and language therapist. I work in South East London for a trust working mainly in mainstream schools.
Hi, my name's Heeral. I'm a speech and language therapist. I work with young children, mostly under 5. And I also work in South East London with Angela, and we set up SLTs of Colour together about a month ago.
Today's episode will be about the Black Lives Matter movement and its relevance to SLT in the UK. The murder of George Floyd being the catalyst for protests in Minneapolis and internationally is not an isolated event. Black people are subjected to discrimination in the UK related to education, healthcare, employment and policing. As students and professionals who work in healthcare, it is important for us to reflect on racism and equality in our field. I think a big question that comes up is how does race and ethnicity and the Black Lives Matter movement relate to speech and language therapy? And in the UK, speech and language therapists are predominantly white and female, according to RCSLT data. When talking about diversity, the response from speech and language therapists, it tends to be around bilingualism and using an interpreter. And when I talk about diversity, or like my colleagues and other students have spoken about diversity and racism, it is important to highlight and discuss the differential treatment of Black SLTs and students in universities and workplaces. If any of you want to share your experiences, if you feel comfortable doing so.
So I think, that's always the case, that whenever you speak about diversity or any kind of ethnic minority groups and working with them and in the field as well, it's always just use an interpreter. And I don't think that's an adequate answer to a lot of the issues, especially in the workplace, not just towards service users, but we're in universities as well. I think we need to think a bit more broadly about how we treat people from minority groups and our experiences, because sometimes it feels like it's just you that's having this like awkward experience or like blatant racism or microaggressions that you're experiencing, and it feels really hard to pinpoint why you're being treated this way. But when you go back and you speak to your colleagues and fellow students that look like you, they've always got experiences that are just about the same. So I think it's a wide range, like it's a huge issue that a lot of us don't really talk about, and we feel a bit removed from it because we use an interpreter.
I just wanted to say that's a really good example. We had lectures on cultural awareness, but actually a lot of it was focused on, as you said, using interpreters and kind of understanding about there are different ways that particular groups of people will act. But what surprised me was that I don't think they realised how ironic some of those lectures were. When it's like looking around of the few ethnic minorities who are in this session and thinking, well, if you think that you need to potentially act differently and consider different things towards other members and the people we're working with, do you not think that applies to the people who are with us? Do you not think that maybe you should look around the room and consider, why are we only from a particular demographic, I think?
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of thinking behind cultural competency that is not touched upon, such as norms and like things that are appropriate within those family cultures and upbringings. We always talk about individualized care, patient-centered solutions, all that kind of stuff in our theoretical teaching, but why do we never apply that to cultural narratives and cultural context? So that for me in the course was really sort of confusing and a bit of a shock that it wasn't touched upon like that.
I think I'm quite fortunate because we had a whole day on this in our lecture, and I think I was one of three black students, and I think there were 2 Asian students. So there was quite a lot, and I think there was only 27 or so of us. So our lecture was a full day, and our lecturer did kind of try to go outside those barriers. And the way that she did it was to indulge in talks, in group talks. And what I found really awkward was being only one of a few of us when we're asked to kind of consider, why is it that the therapy services that we are in are mainly white middle class ladies? And I felt really awkward being in a group of only white people to kind of consider all of the different possibilities, and to have to argue that by myself as well. And I feel like there's always this part of being the I don't want to say I don't want to use the word the token, but being the one black person who needs to answer and speak for everybody else. And so therefore I have the answers for all of other black people and what they experience. So even though I wasn't happy with the way it went, I didn't feel empowered enough and felt I had enough knowledge and support to be able to speak up.
And I think the other thing is, if you do speak up, yeah, I agree that sometimes you feel like the representative for all minority or black people, and that's quite tough. But I think also if you do raise any issues, it's not always clear where that goes and whether anything will come from that. And I think sometimes we just have discussions and that just sort of doesn't land anywhere. We're just, going into those emotions, and I barely ever see any kind of result with that. So even if I were to sort of share experiences with staff at university or at uni and at work, I'm not confident that something will be done about that anyway. And I think also we don't have the answers. That's so true. Like when we're the ones, probably we're asking you why this is the issue, not the other way around. So yeah, it's always a tough position to be in, actually, as the one person. You feel eyes on you.
I think also the emotional bearing and the exhaustion that it has on like Black and ethnic minority background SLTs and students, and I think there's not an awareness from the white colleagues of how emotionally exhausting it can be. Hearing other students in my course when discussing this topic, and just the way that they're speaking about it, it's so difficult because when they're talking about their experiences, they're not confident in their experiences because it has not been validated. It's just the onus of the experience of the therapist is sometimes just it feels like it's too exhausting to try and like explain microaggressions and explain all these experiences.
I totally agree, because it sounds like what you're saying is we go through these experiences and we can talk to our fellow BAME students about that without having to go too deeply into it, and they get it straight away. But when you're trying to explain it to somebody who isn't, and then you're trying to pull it apart and go into it really deeply, and this isn't the first time, and it's really, like you say, it's quite exhausting. And also there's also that doubt creeping in that you're having to help them understand why this is offensive and why it's hurt you. And I think I'm really fortunate because there are lots of BAME SLTs where I work, and I know I can go to those colleagues and I can say something and they go, oh my God. And I'm really fortunate we have a manager who's BAME, so it isn't ever an issue there. But when we go to some other people, or when I've been on placement and then having to drill that down, sometimes you think, well, you don't, do you? You don't bother with it, you leave it, you suck it up, and then you just go on. And yeah, it becomes draining because it sits on you and it weighs on you. And I think I'm so fortunate being in the team that I am in, but it hasn't stopped us from still having those difficulties and those feelings. And this is just in work. Forget all the rest of the things that we have to do in life.
I think personally for me, I feel like some of the the issues that I've had in my clinical work have been really difficult to label and really difficult to try and explain. And so it does feel exhausting when you have to justify to someone why something is offensive to you because they can't see it. And I sometimes have got to that point where I'm like, you know, I am going to ignore it and I'm just going to find a way to make this work so that I can do what I feel is best for this child because they're my priority, and forget about how actually for me as a therapist going into these sessions, it's so exhausting. So it's kind of, for me personally, it's been a two-way thing. It's been microaggressions from the families that I'm working with. Why is a brown lady trying to teach a white person how to talk is something that I have experienced a lot. And then when it is so subtle, to try and explain to management why I'm so exhausted after just one session of therapy when you're expected to do 5 or 6 in a day. So yeah, I mean, I think when it's really obvious that someone is being racist, I feel like it's almost easier for people to get on board and say, no, that's not okay, and you know, here's what we can do to support you. But when it's something that can't be labelled, or you know, as we're referring to it as a microaggression, and you're having to tease apart why that can be so difficult, I feel like actually it's so exhausting to go there that, you know, I've hands up, I opt out and think, you know what, I'll just suck this up and work through it in my own way.
Sort of brings us onto the fact that we've sort of been passively putting these stories out there as a community, and now as a result of the recent events, they're being taken seriously by the Royal College, and then the Black Lives Matter statement was put out by the Royal College. Maybe Anne can explain kind of where that statement came from, what was the motivations towards it, as somebody who was involved.
I just one day, this is a couple of days after the video of George Floyd's murder came out, and there were quite a few protests and stuff, and I had noticed that I think it was drama therapists, they had released a statement showing in support, and like quite a lot of other like probably every fashion organization, every other like organization had like said something, and I was just a bit like, this is really weird that the RCSLT haven't said anything. I did know that like some of the other professional bodies hadn't yet, but I didn't really care. Like, just like be the first one to say something. And I think for me, the night before, I was like looking at the RCSLT's Instagram and like didn't see a single black person on it, which was, I just found absolutely bizarre, because like even as much as I hate tokenism, even just like having the odd person there would have just like, just to tick that box, but not even that. So I just found that absolutely bizarre. So I went on a bit of a, not a rant, but just like a burst of my thoughts around the issue, and why for me as a black woman, I hate the fact that they haven't said anything, and thinking about research into black kids are more likely to get excluded in school, but they're a lot less likely to get speech and language intervention, when we know that there is a link between kids that are like getting exposed, kids that are getting expelled and speech and language communication needs. But there's a real link in research and in like to do with young black kids and communication. And as speech and language therapists, even like going up and like thinking about the different kinds of care that we receive, thinking about like, this was around the same time as the COVID Public Health England report as well, saying that that BAME people are more likely to die from this disease, and it was more from systemic issues, not really from anything else. So yeah, just went on Twitter and messaged RCSLT and kind of just said how I felt, and it feels weird being like, oh, the statement was because of me, because it definitely wasn't. I remember following Ilya on Twitter, and like, I remember you from when we were at City. I was at City, you were at City. Yeah, I didn't phrase that properly at all. Yeah, I remember you from City, and like following you on Twitter and seeing the different things that you said, and like loads of other people as well. And I know I've had these conversations a million times, so I just kind of laid it out and basically said how I felt, and got a lot of like positive response, and I think it was really interesting because a lot of people were kind of like, yeah, this is an issue. But I think it's that thing of like speech and language therapists are very nice, and like a lot of nice white females who I'm sure are very well meaning but just won't rock the boat in that way. So I had a lot of positive response, and then got contacted by the CEO of the RCSLT. We had a bit of a chat about my experiences and her experiences, and then got in contact with one of the policy makers in the RCSLT to release the statement. But one of the main aims, and something that I really wanted to hammer home, was like, it's not just about saying that you stand with Black Lives Matter. It's about being anti-racist and being anti those movements, and also making movements towards making speech and language therapy equitable profession for everyone involved and for its service users as well. From like the statement itself, maybe we can like chat more about this, I think, in a bit, but the statement itself, I think it's good, and it does lay out suggestions going forward. It'll be interesting to see where it goes.
I agree. And also, when you like made your tweet, and the response of how Kamini is a ethnic minority and has similar experience is the most infuriating response probably to hear when you're trying to group together. And it's just, as speech and language therapists, I think, especially white speech and language therapists, if they hear Black and ethnic minority, they just group them. They think they have all the same experiences, and that is not the case at all. It's Black speech and language therapists that might be more overtly discriminated against than someone of a lighter skin color or someone of my shade. And it's just I think, I'm not sure, but I'm not going to generalize, but a lot of white people might not understand that similarity. So they think, oh, they have Kamini as a CEO of RCSLT, she's probably gone through some experiences, but they probably are nowhere near the same experiences as a Black speech and language therapist. And the disregard of not taking, like, having that response put out there first, I think that was quite damaging to other people witnessing that and reading. This is the first statement they're putting out. Well, not statement, but that's the first tweet in response.
But another thing is that Kamini has been the CEO of Royal College for a long time, and why is it that nothing has happened until now? I'm not trying to throw shade or anything, but if she really was passionate about diversifying and equality within the profession, I feel like these statements that were made, which actually have been made for quite a while, there was nothing new in the statement that came out. I've been hearing these, like you said, and we've all been sort of connected in a wider community over Twitter, and as students, but also as working professionals. And I've been having these conversations for so many years, and I know that other people have been for even longer than I've been involved in the speech therapy word. And yes, it was nice that the statement put everything on one page, that people have been sort of whispering passively into the Twitter world, but they weren't new, and it wasn't suggestions that were so out of the box and revolutionary in terms of, like you said, rocking the boat. It was very sort of like, we've thought about it, and we kind of want to try this out, let's see how it goes. But there was no urgent push towards an action plan, and there was no sort of confirmation, anything that made me as a speech therapist of color feel confident that there was going to be change, and that coming from this statement, I'm going to feel a lot safer and a lot more represented within my profession. And I just think that it's great that Kamini now is, she hosted the ethnicity diversity workshop meeting that happened last week or the week before. Great, she's doing that, but why did it take until this breaking point for her to make that happen? I think that's not good enough. And I think that her experiences are being voiced now, but she's had a platform and a position for a long time, and having a person of color on the system doesn't mean that the system is good for people of color. Like, we can't just hold these individuals responsible for taking on all that responsibility, like we've all been saying on our platforms. It's actually these really lovely white speech therapists' role to be actively pushing that within their organizations, within their settings, and within their workplaces. So yeah, great. We got 60 people to attend a Zoom meeting and called ourselves the Ethnicity Working Group. But now what? How does that message trickle down into the people that need to be hearing it and the people that are able to make the changes, including Harmony, in my opinion?
I completely agree. I think, unfortunately, I think for me, especially coming into the profession, I don't like meeting you, Suleika and Angela now. I don't think I'd ever met qualified Black speech and language therapists. Like, I'd never had. So for me, like the state, like I had already felt quite like marginalized in doing what I wanted to do. Yeah, I don't think the statement was. I think it was a bit too little, too late, sadly. And I know that RCSLT have been working on improving diversity, but for me, I think I kind of lost cause in that when it was kind of grouped with increasing the gender ratio, because I do not understand the push for wanting to get more men into speech and language therapy when there is such a stark ethnic imbalance. For a profession that won't even ask what ethnicity you are on forms, so we don't actually have any data on ethnic diversity of speech and language therapists. The fact that it did begin before the pandemic and before the Black Lives Matter movement, there was a diversity working group, but it wasn't working to get more men in. I think I kind of lost hope. It sounds awful, but I kind of lost hope with that battle when we had a diversity lecture at uni, and it was a white male student that was called up to talk to everyone about how the RCSLT doesn't have enough men in there. But there's not enough men in speech language therapy. And for me as a Black woman, I don't care. Like, I feel bad, but I don't care.
On one hand, playing devil's advocate, I understand about the push for more men. The majority of the students that we work with are boys. So it's kind of helpful to have that level of a role model. However, especially if you're in London, the majority of your population will also be Black boys. So therefore, let's have some of that, more of that representation. I completely agree.
Yeah, I feel like it was a huge missed opportunity. I feel like I am, on the one side, really grateful that they said something, even if it was, a forced hand in saying something. But I can't help but feel like after 10 years of being in the profession, this just feels like another bit of tokenism. And it is really, on the one side, I'm thinking, okay, well, let's see what action's going to really come from this. And on the other hand, I'm like, well, I'm just going to take action myself now. I think that's really where me and Angie got to, where we were like, well, let's create change then. Because I think waiting on the profession, when you have, for me, I'm seeing someone who looks like me right at the top of the profession, yet completely doing nothing that supports me. And I can't think of a harder contradiction, really. And it's disappointing is where I'm coming at it from, because it's no surprise to anyone that there's an issue around diversity and inclusion of SLTs from diverse backgrounds, and the fact that we're still talking about this in 2020, is ridiculous, really. And so I think it's got to that stage where I feel like actually there's so many platforms out there, and we should be using them, which we're trying to in SLTs of colour, to allow therapists to share their stories and share their voice.
Yeah, exactly. So what you just said links really nicely to us kind of going into the statement in a bit more detail. So one of the first points that they put was about increasing visibility, and like you just said, Angela and Heeral really took it into their own hands and created a platform which was specific for that. So it would be really nice if you guys could talk a bit more about your motivations towards that, how much of that was a response to the statement, and kind of what your vision and your plan is for that platform and for that space now that it exists.
SLTs of colour was born out of just anger. I was so upset. I was really, and I think they had just retweeted Kamini's tweet at that time. So I was thinking, like, this is really not good enough. And I've spent a lot, 17 years I've been involved in speech therapy, and I've paid my dues. 17 years I've paid money, and they can't even say something themselves. They had to retweet. So anyway, I had seen SLPs of colour on the American ones. I'd followed them for a little bit now, and I thought, well, we should have something like that. We should have something here that showcases the fact that there are so many of us, and also, if you can't see that we are there, then how do you know that that's something that you want to achieve as well? So part of it was very much like, let's just have a website up there, let's show how many therapists there are. Also, while we're at it, let's support the therapists, because we all know that, well, rephrase that, I have spoken to lots of therapists of colour who have had really poor time during their lectures. They've had quite a poor experience during their placements, and they've had a poor experience during their work. So I felt, well, we can all support each other, we can all talk about that. And then I think, like, by the time I started talking to Heeral, things started to move on a little bit further, and thinking, rather than thinking, oh well, we can push this to the RCSLT's way, and then we thought, well, let's just do it ourselves.
Yeah, I could feel the anger when I was talking to Angie, and I was feeling riled up myself when she was talking to me, because what I was feeling so angry about was the fact that this video was being shown was at, like, early in the morning, my kids are having their breakfast, and this video is being shown of a man being murdered, and there's no warning before showing this video. There's no, we're going to show you something distressing. It was just shown as if, it was nothing. And I was furious about the fact that, take skin color out of it. How can you show a man being murdered on TV without anything, no warning, nothing? And so I was feeling really angry myself. And when Angie was kind of speaking to me and telling me her viewpoint, I was thinking, how do we create something positive from this? How can we drive change? And not just, what I feel like RCSLT have done here is come up with a really comprehensive, or what looks comprehensive, plan, but no real way to carry it out. And I didn't want another sort of piece of paper telling us about things we could do. This just felt very practical, and something we could just get stuck into straight away. And so, as scary as it was for Angie to put that profile out there of herself as the first SLT feature on Instagram, I felt like we had to put ourselves out there first. And so Angie went first, and then I went, and actually that was enough to sort of create a little catalyst. And we had therapists messaging us saying, yeah, we want to be on too. We're very fortunate. We work for a trust that is very diverse, and we had therapists kind of championing it and saying, we want to get behind this too. And I think that just goes to show how many of the speech and language therapists of colour that we work with were feeling the same frustrations that we were from this. And I think it was quite organic, actually, and that I hope comes across in the page, that actually it's really supposed to be something that allows people to share their stories. We do not edit. We allow people to share their stories how they want to. And, for us, it's about people feeling like they've got a safe space to share and say what they want to say without feeling like, they have to conform to what we know as the norm for a speech and language therapist.
Yeah, I think it's really important to just start with practical solutions practical steps towards finding solutions to a lot of these issues. So yeah, just being proactive, and a lot of us have within our remit, we're able to do a little bit. It doesn't take too much time to be more visible in secondary schools, maybe, to show offering work experience opportunities, and sort of being visible at careers fairs, which I found a great way to get more people engaged, and being more visible just across. I think it's important to be online and so on, but actually reaching the community that we want to join us in speech and language therapy, being more visible in environments where people might be more drawn to becoming speech and language therapists online. Your page has so many followers now, and a lot of people interacting and relating and supporting, and I think it really does go to show how much it was needed, and I think that is the way that we should go about it, instead of waiting for bureaucracy and all the issues of like paperwork and who's going to do this and delegating tasks and so on. Just actually, we can all mentor people, we can all go into schools and things and just be more visible. As a student, I didn't see any Black speech and language therapists that were qualified, and that was quite hard. And I think now I can see more in my where I work, but I think there is still a way to go. I think also, if there's more people from minorities higher up, it can support us in situations where we'll be able to find people that relate to us. So I know in the NHS, BAME staff are more likely to not be able to access non-mandatory CPD opportunities, and we're more likely to go through the disciplinary process, and that's all in NHS's findings. And I think we're sort of disadvantaged even after we qualify. So we need the representation to support us as well, as much as we want there to be more therapists of colour. I
agree, and I think it goes back to like what we were saying about the statement, like, is it enough? Because that was one of the points, to increase visibility. I went on the RCSLT Instagram, I think it was yesterday, a couple of days ago, still no change, and that's like a month after the statement's been released. So I got so excited when I saw the SLTs of colour Instagram, because I'd never seen anything like that, and like I generally didn't know that there were so many ethnic minority speech and language therapists out there. And it's still like, whenever I read the stories on there, it's still like, oh my god, that's so cool. I didn't know like there, like, and I don't know, it's that thing of like, I didn't know they didn't exist. And I guess it like links to that thing of like, you can't be who you can't see, and it is nice to just see people that have similar stories, or stories that are just like completely different to yours, and seeing the diversity that is hopefully in the profession, or like aspiring to be in the profession. So I love your Instagram page.
That's really great, because that's one of the things we do want. Why we don't touch the stories as well is because we do want people, SLTs to look at that page and go, well, this person did something different, or this woman had 2 kids before she started on her journey. So we do want to see that. We want to show that everybody got there through a different route.
To move on to the second point, which was to create a platform or a safe space for BAME members, including SLT students, to express the challenges that they face without judgment or fear of repercussion. I think this is important, and I think it is obviously places like SLTs of colour and like places where people can share stories and reach out to others. But I don't know, what do you guys think of that statement? Because what would that look like?
I think when I heard about this originally, I understood it would be like a platform where someone logs in.
Yeah.
And then, and my thing about that was, and I think Heeral and I had this conversation, that I don't think that's quite how people work. You pick up your phone and you go to some place, and then you feed back your information there. There's very little logging in and going onto a platform in order to be able to express something. People are more likely to go to Twitter or to go to Instagram, or even Facebook's had to change the way that people log in. So my worry is something like that, where young people or people may not use that as much, and then it will be put aside, saying, well, nobody used it, therefore the need isn't there. So obviously there needs to be a platform of some sort, but I think it needs to be fairly easy for anybody to be able to access and also that if they're going to put something on there that is acted on as well. We want change. We want people to. We want change to be effective. We want people to be able to feel that this is an appropriate way to act towards a person of colour.
And I think too often these spaces are facilitated and it turns into a sort of a group therapy session for everybody to vent about their experiences and their frustrations, and then organizations and bodies kind of just go, okay, cool, we've accounted for their emotional well-being because we gave them that space to have those discussions. But that's not enough. Like you said, we've been having these discussions on Twitter and out in public. We don't need you to then tuck it away in a private little corner on the Royal College website. We need you to hear us and then give us action plans. Just like, say, for example, Apple, the company, you got a problem with your computer, you go on their forum, you write, this is the problem I have with my computer, and within 24 hours you get 3 people who work at Apple head office telling you exactly how to fix your computer and how to contact them if it doesn't work. That's a support forum, and that's a support system. And I'm not trying to say that we're just, machines in the speech therapy world, but there needs to be, in my opinion, the Royal College need to invest money and time on people that are trained in policy and solutions and who are going to be accessing this platform or forum that the Royal College wanted to facilitate, and taking what people are putting out there and then offering very clear advice, support, strategies and actions. And that's the only way an online platform like this is ever going to work.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I guess that kind of leads on to the next point, which is to hold a profession-wide online event led by members of the BAME community in order to have a candid conversation about racism and discrimination to support cultural change within the profession. So what would a space like that or an event like that look like for us as Black and minority ethnic clinicians? Because I think an event would be nice, but I think it's not enough.
I'm interested to know also whether white colleagues will be involved with this, because I think us having a candid conversation with each other doesn't really go anywhere. I think it's the people that don't really engage online, and we need to get outside this echo chamber of all of us who agree with each other, having the same conversation again and again. Outside of that, there's a lot of people that don't engage with these conversations, and that's where, I guess, if we have the candid conversation, is that then going towards mandatory training? Where do those conversations go? I'd be interested to know if then this will contribute towards some sort of training or a competency framework. So I don't think white therapists are given an opportunity to reflect on their own contribution to our experience, and I think that is what needs to happen, because I can talk about it all day. We can all talk about it, but we need them to engage in that conversation. And I think the change doesn't come from us, it comes from them, because we're not oppressing ourselves, are we? So we need the conversation to go outside of this community, really.
Absolutely, we can't do this by ourselves. I think that's one of the things Heeral and I spoke about. And what's really pleasing about the SLTs of colour is that we are getting white therapists who are asking, is it possible for us to mentor somebody? And we, like you said, we cannot make this change by ourselves, because we all know what the difficulties are. I don't think that some of our colleagues understand what it's like to be us, because they haven't had that opportunity to put themselves into somebody else's headspace. And I think any kind of training, any kind of a forum like that absolutely should have people who are not us, so that they can hear from us what it's like to be us in that world, and and problem solve together potentially about how we can change that. I do like the idea of something compulsory in terms of a competency, but I'm very much about this. I hate the cultural competency, as if it's like it's ticked, it's done, and that's it, I'm competent now. And so I really would like, and I don't know what that looks like. I mean, that's the thing. I came into this space from anger and just being fed up of hearing people, you know, being killed by police, or being killed by black people being killed by non-black people, and non-black people making excuses for those deaths as well. So I don't have the answers, but what I do know is that things do have to change.
I 100% agree that there needs to be some accountability held for people in embarking on this cultural competency journey, because it's not, like you said, it's not just a tick box that you can say that now you're culturally competent. It's something that, just like we all continue with our CPD throughout our professions, we should be putting that exact same drive and emphasis on improving our cultural awareness, humility, and education throughout our professions at all levels as speech therapists. And I think that it's actually the Royal College as a governing body's responsibility to hold people accountable for that and to prioritize that. And that, I mean, they have people that work in policy. I keep talking about it being an actual somebody's job, but it is somebody's job to think about our proficiency standards, our CPD development, how we as a profession are held accountable for our service, and how that we as a profession can give the best service that we can to the people that need it. And this is so vital to a large population of people that we're treating and the people that we're accessing in the community. So the fact that it's not been prioritized by the Royal College and people are not held accountable for that sort of further education is just really worrying and, like you said, upsetting. And it just makes us angry, really, because we can't run away from it. Likewise, the families that we are treating can't run away from it.
And I think, yeah, we've touched on like the last point out of the suggestions on the statement, which was to encourage members to learn and engage more through literature to support greater understanding, awareness, and active change of racist and or discriminatory practice, and to create a culture of challenging those behaviours. Something I guess I want to ask to the group, because I know in my lecture that we did on diversity, and we mainly just spoke about, it was just touched upon ethnic diversity, but we kind of had this thing of like having BAME, just the experiences of BAME people all stuffed into one category. There was no kind of like differentiation, and also no kind of additional consideration for intersections within that, so like religion and disability, sexuality, everything. I just want to know if when people want to share their experiences around that, have you had any kind of like, I guess, education or like had any kind of discussions around that?
No, I also had one lecture and it was kind of all kinds of diversity all bundled into one, and I didn't find that very helpful. It was also quite sad that a lot of people left after they read, like, it was the lecture I was looking forward to, and a lot of people just left halfway through. And I think that goes to show how much people care about diversity in the profession, because it's a priority for me, but it's not for a lot of people, because they get to opt out of that, and I don't, quite simply. And yeah, I agree with the not considering the intersections. So as a visibly Muslim and Black therapist, I find that people are more open to talk about Islamophobia than race. I think a lot of people will talk about and about something that's happened in the world and want me to justify that before they would ever talk about anything that's happening around Black issues, towards Black people around the world. So I think that is a very good point, that a lot of us pass judgments. We don't really, for me, I can't differentiate if someone's discriminating against me because of what I look like, or whether it's because I wear a Muslim, or whether because I'm Black. So I think
whether you are whether what you're experiencing is part of, you know, being a female, being Muslim, or being Black, or whatever it is, but the lecture that you had didn't really cover that part, and also the people who were there didn't really get to take part and understand that, because it was optional for them, apparently.
Going back to like what you said about the lecture, so I find that really interesting because we kind of had, well, it wasn't really talked about that in depth, but like no one really engages when that conversation tries to be had. And I think it's this thing of like people aren't, I think it's the fact that some people like see themselves as they're not actively racist, that they're not going around calling people all sorts and like being rude. But I think people need to understand that we need to now move past that, and you need to be actively anti-racist.
But like you said, I think that the intersectionality of it is complex and it scares people. They don't know where to start, especially people who don't experience it. They are overwhelmed by the reality, and they don't know how to begin in terms of changing it. And so this is what I mean in terms of the statement, like they don't really address intersectionality within the statement. By not addressing it and not bringing to light the complexity of these issues, you're allowing people to get away with not committing themselves into educating themselves about it, delving deeper into it, and finding solutions. From the very beginning of any change that the Royal College and the speech therapy workforce are going to make, it needs to address the complexities of the intersectionality of all these issues from the beginning. We can't run away from it. We can't let people get away with sort of shallow changes that are not really dealing with the root of the problem, because then that's what people have been doing for years in all aspects of life. People need to be educated on the realities, and whether they like it or not. And yeah, it's overwhelming and it's complex, but we're living it every day. So why is it that we have to give you the answers on how to deal with that? And why do we have to pick out how to address those sort of complexities in the workplace? So yeah, I know. So the Royal College always say that they're trying to create a safe space and promote an attitude of what was it, the terminology, promoting an attitude of calling out and challenging these behaviors. But the first step in doing that is recognizing them. I think recognizing all of them, all of the challenges and all the intersectionalities and all of the problems, and verbalizing that clearly, and making that known. And I think the Royal College haven't done that yet still.
Yeah, verbalize it in a full article, not just in a tweet. Examine it, examine the attitudes within themselves and how they see things, and start to challenge the rest of the therapists to start to identify that within themselves as well.
For me, thinking about like when I like expressed my thoughts on Twitter and like the response that I got going forward, I think I was hopeful that making a statement would actually mean actual change. And I think maybe that was me being quite naive and thinking this is like, because it was my first time properly, like I had a call from the CEO of the RCSLT and I had like all these conversations around this statement. I really thought that something would happen, and I guess it's a great learning point for me, knowing that like you kind of have to do things yourself. I'm not here to like completely criticize the statement, because I did kind of okay it, and like I did, because I do kind of agree with the sentiment behind it. I think now for me, a month later, the fact that nothing has changed, I'm now just a bit done.
I'm trying to add that. I know I'm coming for the statement a lot, but it did make a difference. Like, I don't want you to feel like it's not done anything. Like Angela and Heeral put together the platform that they created, and likewise we've got this podcast now, and so this all stemmed from the statement. So it has done something. I don't want to discredit you and all the people that worked from that statement for what it has done. It has given us confidence in being less passive about our frustrations. But my only attack against it is that the words in the statement were things that I've been hearing repeatedly over the years, and now that we've got this confidence from it, we can make the Royal College accountable to actually making changes out of it. That's my only thing in terms of the statement. But yeah,
it kind of leads to the question, what do we want to see in SLT going forward, and what does that mean for us in terms of like what we do to help change that as people of colour?
I think ideally for me, it's everyone within the profession realising that they are part of the solution. It's, for me, really just reflecting on your own kind of understanding of diversity and culture, and how actually you can just start where you are. You know, it's not a case of, for me, yes, let's hold RCSLT to account, and I would love to see them implement some real change from this, but I'm not going to sit and wait for them. And I guess what I'm hoping is that anyone that listens kind of goes, well, where am I at on this journey, and how can I start from here, without waiting for guidance or a framework or a checklist or a platform, you know, and realize the importance, not just in terms of supporting their peers and their colleagues, but actually for the client group that we work with, right? Like I work with young children, and you know, the majority of them are Black or from an ethnic background, and how is the therapy I'm doing meaningful for them if I'm not really understanding what they're going through? And thankfully, I read a lot, I reflect a lot, and I can bring that to the work that I do, but I don't understand it all. And it's about engaging in difficult conversations. It's about listening, and it's about willingness to change and go, okay, well, how can I grow? How can I develop? We're happy to do it for all other areas of the work that we do. There's new literature in language disorder. Hey, let's change the way we diagnose. Well, are we changing the way that we use resources to meaningfully change how we increase engagement in our therapy, or get a family to attend more? So for me, it's really about starting from myself and encouraging other people to start from wherever their journey is at.
One of a lady who I'd done a training with years ago messaged me to say what could she do, a white teacher actually, and I'm thinking about, like Anne said, we're not experts. We're just living our own life and just trying to get by, put one foot in front of the other. And this lady was asking me what could she do, and I was thinking, well, I don't know. But actually, because I don't want to send links to people for you to read this or whatever. We are in a very technological age. You can look that for yourself. But what I did say to her was that she should listen to people or BAME people's experiences. When they tell you that they've experienced something, listen to it, and listen to hear, not to react. Listen to our experiences, because by the more you listen to what we have to say, then the easier it is for you to be able to understand that this is just a very small part of our life and we are living this. And I can't think of any other way for you to experience the life that we live, in order for you to understand that, so that you can change the way that you respond to us.
I agree with Angela. I think that also Black speech language therapists and ethnic minority speech language therapists may not be not comfortable going to, like, let's say their white manager or the white lecturer when they're doing appraisals or when they're in tutorials, asking these questions. And I think that comes with their uncomfortability and not knowing how to navigate that, and that's where they need outside help. In university, what I've experienced is that higher ups are not willing to go the extra mile and get input and think that they're the experts when this is not their realm. So having outsourcing it in terms of asking help to how they can support their students and their speech language therapists, I think is the key.
They need to realise that we need support, don't they? And I don't think that's on their horizon. They don't consider it to be an extra difficulty that we have.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to recognise that it's not always just coming from colleagues or fellow students, that kind of discrimination, but it's also from service users. And when we bring it up, it's on us to prove that something has gone wrong or that something's happened, and then that becomes really difficult. But I think one of the things everyone can go away and do would be to address their own bias. So everyone has assumptions that they make when they see people, and I think taking that time to reflect on what your assumptions are is a good place to start. Because when you see someone walk through the door, you might go, "That's a difficult family," because you've got that idea about that group of people, or hard to reach. That's another one. And I think that's where you should start, because it impacts your practice. Yeah, I agree. Listening and addressing your own biases and reflecting on that and doing something about it. It's uncomfortable for everyone, but you need to start with that.
It's not up to us to be able to provide people with the information that they, for us to read, say, oh, read this book, this is a great book.
I found that a lot of people avoid eye contact as a student and even as a therapist now, and the small talk that we have is very different to the small talk that you have with your white colleagues. Just addressing your biases, you've already made an assumption, and a lot of the time I can see that when I introduced myself as a speech and language therapist, you thought I was a TA, or you thought I was in a different position, because you always find that in a lot of schools, people that are higher, the teachers are usually white, and TAs are majority from minorities, and you assume that I was an agency TA when I walked into the classroom, and you also assume that when I sit in the office, maybe she's not supposed to be sitting here, but I can see that on people's face, and I think that is so it does a lot to, when I was newly qualified, our experience and having that imposter syndrome, it just exacerbates all of that. So maybe thinking about our biases. Thank you everyone for listening in on our first episode on SLT Time. We were joined by Heeral and Angela from SLTs of Colour. In this episode, we spoke about Black Lives Matter and the statement released by the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists, and our ideas and suggestions. We spoke about some of our experiences and why it's important for speech and language therapists who are from minorities, but also white speech and language therapists, to start engaging in these conversations in the workplace and in university.
Be sure to follow our Twitter and our Instagram,
SLT Time,
at SLT Time.
SLT Time, to keep up to date with new episode releases.
And that's the SLT for today. Bye!
Bye.